Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We appreciate you being here with us, watching this live. And please note that I'm really, really happy to be here with you because I have my co host, yes, our co host of the Seeds of Knowledge series of the Solitude Center for Spiritual Living, Yuri Castro. And good morning, Yuri. Hope you're doing well.
Good morning, Marcia. Thank you very much. I'm doing great.
Great. And for all of you who are here, if this is the first time you're tuning in to one of our discussions about Spiritism and all of the peripheral discussions on that we bring to you, we welcome you to the Solitude Center for Spiritual Living, a virtual center dedicated to the study and dissemination of Spiritism. And I'm going to pass on the mic to you, Yuri, and we'll be in the backstage until you finish. But I want to say thank you, all of you, and looking forward to it. Yuri, one more question. Do you have any slides that you want to share?
Yes, they're going to
Okay.
be right here.
Okay. So, all of you, this is such a great moment to have Yuri here with us. But let me go ahead and say goodbye, and I'll see you later, Yuri.
See you later. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever you are, and whenever you're hearing and listening or watching this. It's always an honor to be here, helping disseminate Spiritism and the teachings that are so precious to us and they are so applicable to our day to day. So today we're going to be talking about this very dear topic of my heart, speech and silence. So how do our words change our reality? How can they modulate, construct, destroy, do all of those things? And what's the importance of staying quiet, staying silent? We're going to go first to the book Between Heaven and Earth. And this is a book by Chico Xavier, psychograph by Chico Xavier. It's a book by André Luiz. And in this specific book that you can see on the top right corner of the slide, and that's always where the sources of the slide are going to be. So in the specific part of this book, Clarencio, which is one of the characters, he takes André Luiz, who is the narrator, to the house of this woman named Clara. Clara, this is in the spiritual world, and Clara has in her own house, she has sort of like an institution, a learning institution for women, and they go to visit there just to say hi and to gather some information from her. And as they go there, she's talking about the importance of the voice in the service of speech. So here are some of the things that Clara is teaching them. She says that speech, whatever it may be, invariably entails specific electrical energies, liberating rays of a dynamic nature. So she's already talking about this dynamic nature, meaning something that shifts, something that changes, something that alters itself, and everything around it. So she says, the mind is the incessant generator of power through the positive and negative wires of the sentiment and the thought, thereby producing speech, which is an electromagnetic discharge regulated by the voice. So she's talking about how the mind is this incessant generator of power. And she uses these terms that's interesting to make an analogy with things that we have in our physical world. She's saying the negative and positive wires of the sentiment and thought. And then what happens is when we have that thought and we have that sentiment, that feeling, and we put those energy, that energy out, one of the ways it comes out is through speech. And she's saying speech is an electromagnetic discharge regulated by the voice. So whatever it is that we're producing with our words through our speech came through the thought embedded with sentiment, and then we're emitting that dynamic energy, or that energy of a dynamic nature. She says that is why in all our areas of activity, the voice modulates speech. This requires the purification of the inner life, because speech, after the mental impulse, lies at the base of creation. Thanks to speech, people approach and adjust themselves to the work they're responsible for, and by means of the voice, such work may be aided or retarded in space and time. There's a lot here. So in a summarized sense, what she's talking about is that in all areas of activity, our voice is going to modulate our speech. The words are going to come through our mouth and into the world. And she's saying that thanks to speech, meaning thanks to what we are creating based on what we're saying, we're going to either be aided or retarded in our progress in space and time, or the work that we're trying to accomplish. It is the law of cause and effect, once again, that we always talk about in these Spiritist lectures about this law of cause and effect. If I'm using this tool that I have, the speech, the words as a tool, if I'm using it for evil, I'm going to be retarding, I'm going to be delaying my own progress and those around me as well. But if I'm using my speech, if I'm using my voice well, in the work that I have, using this tool that I have, I'm going to be aided by the spirits, and I'm probably going to be continuing down on my journey. But it is very hard. It's something that I wanted to bring attention to. I wanted to bring to your attention, whoever it is that's listening to this, that it is very hard to modulate speech. It is very hard to control that. But we need to be aware of the power and the responsibility that we have with this tool called our words, our speech. And in this book of messages, psychographed by Chico, and this is by Emmanuel, he's talking about in this message number 97, he says that what comes out of the heart and mind through the mouth is a living, throbbing force involving the creature for good or evil, depending on the nature of the emission. The psychic elements that we externalize through our mouths are powers acting on our behalf, active factors that act under our responsibility. So the idea is that we are indeed responsible for these emissions. We are responsible for what's coming out of our mouths because, of course, as this saying is going through our minds and our hearts. It's coming from our minds and our hearts and going through our mouths into the world. So we are responsible for these thoughts and feelings externalized by our words or through our words. And again, linking with the knowledge from the previous slide, we are very much responsible for what we create, and we're creating at all times with our speech. Now, moving on to the problem of life and destiny, this book, amazing book, one of my favorite ones from Leon Denis. He's talking in this book and specifically about, one of the things that he talks about, there's a lot of interesting things in the book, but one of the things related to speech that he says is this: the soul, in its deep intuitions, may have the sensation of the infinite things in which it participates and to which it aspires. So there is this intuition. There is this sensation of these infinite things. However, it, the soul, would seek in vain to express them with the rudiments of our feeble human language. In vain would it strive to translate eternal things into the poor language of earth. He says the word would be impotent, yet our evolved consciousness is capable of perceiving the subtle radiations of higher life. And I think this passage is so meaningful because it is talking about, yes, we have this tool at our disposal, but it is far from a perfect tool. It's far from a, let's call it a realized or self-realized tool, in the sense that it is not the pinnacle of all the tools we're going to have at our disposal once we reach the plenitude of our spirits. Quite the opposite. It's one of the most rudimentary and basic ones. And the idea that he's saying here, it is so interesting, because he's alluding to, Leon Denis, the author, is alluding to this notion that in our intuitions, deep down in our soul, we can feel the sensation of the infinite things. We can feel those as inspiration in this deep intuition that he's talking about. But if we were to translate that, or those intuitions, feelings, those sensations into words, we would find ourselves with a limited, very limited task at hand, because we can't really translate some of these higher elements of the spirit into words yet. Perhaps once we advance further on, thousands and thousands and thousands of years from now, as spirits, we won't even need words anymore. But right now we do need words, but if we want to translate those things, we can't. And we don't need to think too much into spiritism or into philosophizing here too much to understand or grasp this concept. All we need to do is try to truly explain what love is to a 4-year-old. Try to convey exactly what the feeling of love, such a deep and high feeling, try to convey exactly what that is and what that feels like to a 4-year-old. And I dare say that if you try this, you're going to find yourself short on words, or short on expressing the magnitude of a sentiment as love. Because love is one of these things, these infinite things, this higher sentiment that we try to translate into words, and thousands of years of music and poems will attest to what I'm saying. We can't really translate everything about love into words. Even speaking about it is hard. And then in this other book, Emmanuel, the benefactor, he, through the hands of Chico Xavier, he tells us this message, number 24, our verb. That's the name of the message. And I love this one, because he's talking about almost like a prescriptive way for us to use our words. He says, words are agents in the construction of all the buildings of life. The verb is the light of life, which Jesus himself used to bequeath to us the renewing gospel. Bequeath means to give, or to leave by, or to hand down. And he says, in everyday work, let your verb be as natural as the simple bread on the table. In the effective exchanges, let us use it as pure water. In serious moments, let us do it like the surgeon's scalpel, which prudently limits itself to the incision in the diseased area without unnecessary blows. On sad days, because of course there will be those, let us consider our verb or our words an effective remedy without deviating from the dosage. Look how beautiful this is as well, because Emmanuel is telling us exactly it's almost like a roadmap, a guide to how do we use our words. In everyday work, be it as natural and simple as the bread on the table, meaning it fulfills its duty, doesn't do too much, and it doesn't do too little. In the effective exchanges, let us use it as pure water. Pure water, because we can see through. It's crystalline, it's transparent, it quenches the thirst. So in the effective exchanges, let us be transparent with our words and really mean what we're saying. And then this is my favorite one. In the serious moments, let us use our verbs, our words, as the surgeons use their scalpels, limiting themselves prudently to the incision of the diseased area. That is such an interesting image for us to realize or to think about of our words on the serious moments, meaning on the discussions, or when we disagree, or when we are having perhaps even an argument, or we're trying to prove a point or understand someone else's, and in those serious moments, because there are those as well, we need to use our words as the surgeons use their scalpel, going very precisely. He's not talking about the lumberjack's axe or the butcher's knife, right? He's talking about a scalpel, very, very precise, yet very powerful tool. So if anything, this is a guide for us how to use our words. But we also have to keep in mind, like I said, the law of, action and reaction, or cause and effect, thinking that whatever we say, however, whatever we're creating through our words, we're going to have consequences of that. So our actions, they do have consequences, and we are responsible for those consequences, because we are responsible for what we do, for what we think, for what we say. This law is immutable. And when we talk about Spiritism, and we see with a wider angle lens, or we see with a wider view, life itself, meaning both the life when we're incarnated or when we're discarnated, we can see that those around us, there is an invisible multitude of people that surround us. We're never truly, the incarnate ones, listen to this, we're never truly alone. We're never truly by ourselves, even when we think we're by ourselves. We always have spirits around us. But the thing is, we will bring to our side whatever it is that we are vibrating on, whatever sort of thoughts, whatever actions we're taking, whatever words we're speaking, we're going to be bringing people around us. And then it's not a question of if we will be. We will be. People will be attracted to us, especially the spirits, based on what we're saying, what we're doing. So when we're thinking about like an argument, we got to think, what sort of things am I saying? What sort of spirits would be attracted to this type of conversation? Am I being too harsh? Am I being hypocritical all the time? Am I being overly materialistic? Am I being irate? Am I being unfair? How am I using my speech in these moments, especially in the serious moments? And how those people are gonna be around us, and they're gonna be influencing us. If we go back to the question 459 of the Spirits book, how much are we influenced by the spirits around us? They say their influence is upon you, meaning upon us, is greater than we suppose. So if we're going to be using our speech, let us use it as Emmanuel was saying in those situations in the previous slide. So we know that those around us, we're attracting the people, the right people, or the people that we want to be next to us. And that is, even like I said, even when we think we're alone, or even if we are cursing at the television, or we're watching, some reality show or something, we're criticizing and just pointing the finger, being overly judgmental. What sort of spirits are going to be attracted to that? Those who also like that. But is that what we want to have around us? So again, there are responsibility, and for us to think a little bit more of this. And in the Gospel according to Spiritism, we have this passage about the overuse of speech. So we're talking about limits. And they say, if we do not exceed the limit of what is necessary for the satisfaction of our needs, we will not have the sicknesses which are provoked as a consequence of these excesses, nor would we experience the vicissitudes that derive from them. Of course, there are so many things that, and again, these tools that we have, intelligence, money, our words, our health, all these tools that we have for our progress and the progress of those around us, if we are exceeding the limits of those, we're going to have consequence. If we're healthy and we decide to eat too much, there will be a consequence. If we are healthy and we try to do too much exercise, there will be a consequence. If we have money to spend there will be a consequence, so forth and so on. Same thing with speech. And then they're saying here, if we put a limit on our ambitions, we would not have to fear ruin. We did not desire to raise ourselves higher. If we did not desire to raise ourselves higher than we are able, we would not have to be afraid of falling. And a little asterisk here. A lot of the times they're not saying that we shouldn't strive to raise our ceiling in a way, but overdoing these things or overthinking or overestimating. If we were humble, we would not suffer the deception of hurt pride. If we practiced the law of charity, we would not be slanderous, jealous, or envious, and so would avoid arguments and fights. Of course, if we did not fall prey to these things, if we did not go into these situations, and we're overusing our speech, and we're just putting no filter to our thoughts and our feelings, and we're just saying whatever comes to mind, we will overuse our tool, aka speech, in this situation. We will overuse and we will fall prey to being slanderers, and we will fall prey to our own shortcomings as evolving spirits that we are. And there is also this other spirit author called Humberto de Campos. Chico Xavier psychographed some of his work, and he's talking about this, this parable, this moment where there was the Jesus was with the apostles, and they were arguing and debating amongst themselves on how to use the verb, how to use the word. Some of them were saying that they thought the master should be more emphatic and more forceful in his speech. Others were leaning more towards the other side and say, no, we think the master should continue to be meek and humble and soft in his speech and all of those things. And they were at this debate, and Jesus was just there sitting and watching. And after they didn't come to a conclusion, and they were upset with each other. So they started to sort of badmouth each other even, and just complaining about that person. He's so stubborn, that person doesn't listen. Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? And then Jesus, he starts to tell them a parable. He says that there was this nation of people who were farming, that they were having trouble with their harvest, with actually planting their seeds, and they were not finding that their seeds were growing. And Jesus tells them that they prayed so much, especially this one person who listened to a word of encouragement that fell on his heart very well. And he started to pray with such fervor and such faith that Jesus says that the good spirits blessed that nation, and that those crops grew a lot. And there was this abundance of plants and crops and all of that. So the nation expanded, they got richer, they got happier because they were having all of this abundance in their agriculture. But what happened was that same person that prayed and so fervently and with a lot of faith, one day that after he was already like rich and he was already happy, he went to a neighboring village who was having the same troubles that they would have a while ago. He went there and he basically taunted them, and he spoke words that he didn't filter very well. And what happened was those words fell into the heart of this person, who then told these other two, her sons actually, and they got very, very upset about what was said of them and the mocking and all of that. So during the night, they went, the neighboring village, the people from there came, and they set the whole plantation on fire from their neighbors. And then that man woke up the next day, everything was gone. And what happened was he went there, he knew that there was the neighbors that had done that, and he started an argument, he started a whole fight with them, and Jesus says the war ensued because their harvests were burning all of that. So the disciples were listening to this with a lot of attentiveness. And as Jesus was saying, he said, a phrase of encouragement and kindness is a ray of light capable of lifting an entire nation, but a disturbing sentence can lead people to ruin. How one sentence from that man, one unfiltered thought or lesser with a thought like Latin in a lesson feeling, how that was the propelling factor behind a whole thing that ensued afterwards, and a whole domino effect of consequences. And Jesus was saying, in truth, the action comes from the arms, but the direction always comes from the thought through the tongue. They're saying the action is coming from the arms, but the direction is coming from the thought and through the tongue. So he's talking about how we must have harmony, and we must be aware and mindful of what we're talking about and how we're talking about. And in this other book here, talking about chatter, that we unfortunately don't have this book translated to English yet, but Emmanuel is going to tell us in the message number 73, he's going to say, let us not forget, however, the evil chatter that always forms around us an immense family of sick or degrading elements, like lethal worms that proliferate in silence and operate in the shadows. Rare people meditate on this. On this what? On this idea that there are these worms, our words, the negative words that we're spewing like poison, they are going to proliferate like these vermin, like these worms in silence and in the shadows. He says, isn't the unruly verb the father of slander, gossip, frivolity, and disturbance? God created the word, man created the talk. Of course, he's talking about, or he's alluding to excessive talk. And then he goes even further to say, if alcohol intoxicates the vicious, destroying their energy, what about the misguided tongue of good that destroys vigorous sowings of happiness and wisdom, love and peace? How many times have we or can we think about a word that came from our mouth or a word that came from somebody else's mouth that completely destroyed that sowing of harmony that was in the place that we were? How many times can we think about that? And he's saying that if alcohol intoxicates the vicious, what about the misguided tongue? Because we can readily point the finger and complain and understand why it's wrong to be addicted to these substances. But what about addiction to slander? What about the addiction to talking about others in an unflattering way, especially when they're not looking, because we think that that's okay when it's not okay? And if we go to the Holy Bible here about slander and judgment, we're going to find a few different passages here. I brought just a few, just some here. In Matthew, we have, for in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them, which is something we spoke on the slide number 1. For out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, and slander. So this was back in a time, so just for us to understand the context. This was back in a time when there was a discussion, because of Judaism as well, about what we should put in our mouths, meaning what we should eat, what was forbidden to eat, etc. And Jesus was saying the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them. It's not necessarily, he's probably saying you're too worried about what you're putting in and not necessarily worried with what you're putting out, what's coming out of your mouth. You're worried what's coming in. But what's coming out is coming from the thought, and these can defile, coming from the heart and the thought, and these can defile someone. And if he says, anyone who speaks ill of a brother speaks ill of the law and judges the law. And if you judge the law, you are no longer a follower of the law, but a judge. And we are not judges. We can't then speak ill of anybody else, because we're going to be, when we do that, we're judging them, and we can't really judge them. We don't know what other people are going through. We don't know the battle they're facing. We don't know their spiritual past. We don't know what they're overcoming. We don't know what they're going through, their challenges, their trials. They're very unique to them. We barely know ours, if we think about it. If we understand the immortality of the soul, in the different reincarnations that we go through to evolve, we have the veil of forgetfulness for our own sake of what we did in the last reincarnation and the other ones. How can we judge then somebody else that we have no idea of what they're going through and what they have been through? Maybe that person that looks to be quote unquote terrible or acting terribly is already somebody who made leaps of progress, and we are there judging them, thinking that they have not done, they're still very bad and they're not progressing enough. But the reality is we don't know, and most importantly, for us to utilize humbleness and understand that we're judging when we shouldn't be judging, because we're not judges. We're not judges of the law. And in this whole situation of talking ill of others or gossiping and things like that, I have this story. I brought this story for you guys today, and it's this idea, or the story, parable, I guess, or story, that there was this village, and it's a fictitious story, obviously. There was this village, and there was this young lady who really liked to gossip. She really liked to talk ill of others and try to make all these intrigues and all of those things. And she was only reaping what she was sowing, and she was not reaping very good things, as we can imagine. So what happened was, one day there was this old wise lady in her village, and everybody said that this lady helped everybody that went there with whatever problems they had. So this young lady, addicted to gossiping and slandering and all of that, she went to this old lady and she said, I've had enough trouble already with gossiping so much. I can't stop it, honestly. I kind of like it, but I know I should stop it. So what should I do? What can I do to change? I don't want to be doing that anymore in the grand scheme of things. So what should I do? So the wise old lady looked at her and she said, okay, I think I may be able to help him, but I'm going to need you to do a few things for me, and you have to trust me. Okay. She said, first, I want you to go out in the village. So grab a backpack or a burlap sack or something that you can put stuff in. And I want you to, let's say, grab this big backpack. And I want you to go around the village collecting feathers from all sorts of birds, any bird you can find, duck, geese, carrion bird, whatever bird you find. Just gather all those feathers, put them all in that backpack. And when you do that, come back here. I'll tell you what to do next. The woman did not understand what was going on, what the purpose of the exercise was, but she said she was going to trust the wise old lady. So she went and she did that. She gathered all those feathers, filled up her backpack after a long time. And then she came back. She went back to the woman and she said, here it is. And then the wise woman said, okay, now what I would like you to do is, do you see the peak of the mountain in our village here? Today is a windy day, so it's a perfect day. I want you to go up that peak, hike all the way up there, climb if you need to. When you get to the top of that peak, I want you to grab your backpack and just empty the whole backpack there. And then come back here. And the woman, still not understanding what the purpose of the exercise was or what it had to do with her, said, okay, I'm going to do that. So with a lot of effort, she went there and she climbed, she hiked, she did all of that, and she emptied all of those feathers, all of that backpack and the top of that mountain. And she saw all those feathers, the wind carrying them in all different directions and all of that. It was actually a beautiful scene, as she observed. But she didn't see much of a purpose. So with an empty backpack now, she went back to the woman, and with the very tired. And the wise woman said, okay, that's great. Now for the last part of our exercise, I want you to go up there and collect all those feathers that you threw out and put them all back inside the backpack and come back here. The young woman was baffled and she said, I don't think you understand. Like, I went up there, I emptied all those feathers, the backpack with all those feathers And the wind carried them in all directions. I have no idea. Maybe I can get one that fell next to where I was, but everything else, all those feathers went in all different directions, all different places. I have no idea where they are and I have no way of getting them back. And the wise woman looked at her and said, and so are your words, just like those feathers. You can't bring them back once you release them. And you have no control over where they're gonna land. That's the reality. The woman was taken aback by the moral lesson of the story, but I like to think that in the story, the ending was that the woman did not gossip anymore and she learned her lesson. Because much like those feathers, if we think about from the story, our words are like that. When we spread them on the wind, especially the higher we go, meaning the more visibility we have, the less control we have of those feathers in our words, where they're gonna stop. For instance, right now, I'm talking here, and this is going on the internet, and I have zero control or notion of where what I'm saying, where this talk about speech and silence is gonna land, and where, and in what ears. I have no control, but I do have control of what's coming out of my mouth and the intention behind that. And in the book Living Spring now, when still on the word for us in the idea of slander for us to be mindful, Emmanuel is saying kindness is not always appropriate in the circle of loyal conversations. Sometimes a clarifying discussion requires serene yet decided forcefulness. Nevertheless, great care in regard to comments made afterwards is indispensable. Slander lies in wait for sincerity in order to muddy its water and neutralize its efforts. Malice does not deserve the crown of serious discussion. Giving it too much importance in conversations actually enlarges its sphere of action. This is interesting because he's saying there will be conversations where we need to be more decided. We need to like really not impose, but really be firm in what we're saying, what we believe in. But still, we need to take great care of what we're saying, how we're saying, because he's saying that slander lies in wait for sincerity in order to muddy its waters. A lot of the times when we're being firm and we're being honest, we may fall prey to the slander just because it's almost like, whoop, it slipped and an extra word came from our mouth, or an extra comment that we didn't need to make. Emmanuel says slander is a subtle poison. So for us to think of what that means and visualize that. And Joanna DeAngelis, the other spiritual benefactor, she says that slander is a culture of uselessness on rotten soil. A culture of uselessness in rotten soil. That's exactly what it is. So we need to be very careful to summarize it with what we speak. And I brought here the main idea that drove me to do a lecture or a talk of speech and silence was Socrates' triple filter, or the three filters or triple filter, however people may say. But Socrates says that before we say anything, whatever we're going to say needs to pass through this filter. Truthfulness, goodness, and usefulness. What I'm about to say, is it true? Is it good, what I'm about to say? Is it rooted in goodness? Is it useful, what I'm about to say? If that's a yes to all of those, then Socrates says you may say it. But if we think a little deeper on this, we're going to realize how many things we have said, how many things we have spoken that would not pass through this filter. Sometimes what we're saying is true. It's written, it's laden with goodness, but it's not useful. Or the timing of it is not a useful time. Or maybe I'm not the person that it needs to be the person to say it. Or sometimes what I'm going to say is true. If I'm going to give a criticism to someone, it's true. It's useful because they may change, but how am I saying it? Is it good the way I'm saying? Is it rooted in a desire for the other person to get better, or just a lesser sentiment from my own? So all those things to consider. I think that if anything from, and this is not even Spiritism, but if anything from this lecture or this talk sticks with whoever's listening, if this sticks, I think I won my day. Because the reality of it is, if we just think of truthfulness, goodness, and usefulness, a lot of the things we were going to say, or we have said, or we will say in the future, we're going to avoid saying, and that's the right path. And then, if we're not going to say it, then let's say it does not pass through the triple filter, a tongue twister, then Chico Xavier, he's going to give us this idea of the water of peace. He says that whenever we're arguing, whenever we are very upset with someone, or we think we're going to say something that's definitely not going to pass through the Socrates filter, we grab some water and we put the water in our mouths, and we keep it there. While we're having that impulse to say that thing that we know we shouldn't be saying, we should keep the water there. And he says, he calls it the water of peace, because how many things we would avoid saying that could cause further problem if we just did that. So then for the second part of our talk today, the silence, because if we're not using the word, we're using silence. And in the Spirit's book, there's a question 772 that says, what is to be thought of the vow of silence prescribed by certain sects from the very earliest times? And then the spirits will give a very interesting answer. They say, you should rather ask yourselves whether speech is in nature and why God has given it. God condemns the abuse, but not the use of the faculties that he has given. Silence, however, is useful, for in silence you have fuller possession of yourself. Your spirit is freer and can then enter into more intimate communication with us. But a vow of silence is an absurdity. If we all were to do the vow of silence, we would not have the progress in the society that we must have. If we were all to be silent and not use the faculties we're given, first, we wouldn't be given them, or we wouldn't have conquered them through thousands and thousands of years of evolution. But we would all be hermits living isolatedly on a cave or a beach or a mountain or something like that. We need to live in society. We need to use our faculties, speech being one of them, just not overuse, not the abuse. And I love this answer from them, that even though people are, they're well-intended when they use the vow of silence, it's just a misuse or a misinterpretation of something that should be. And of course, they're talking about the extreme ones that go for decades without speaking a single word. And if we go to Joanna de Angelis, in the book Happy Life, there's two messages, number 23 and 25, where she talks about silence. She says, express your ideas calmly. If the other person disagrees, remain silent and give him or her over to time, which teaches us all unhurriedly. So he's saying, express your ideas. So if you're in a disagreement with someone, express your ideas calmly. And if the other person disagrees, you can remain silent. That's it. And when asked, this is another one that's interesting, number 25. When asked about another person, always give positive feedback. If this is not possible because the person acts reprehensibly, keep silent or speak benevolently. Avoid aggravating his or her situation or making it more well known. You are not an overseer of other people's behaviors. You cannot know if yesterday's offender might now be in recovery. Let your opinions always be uplifting and your words helpful. I love this part here because she says, you are not an overseer of other people's behaviors. And I dare say that oftentimes we put ourselves in that unpaid position of overseer of other people's behaviors, pointing the finger and giving judgment, passing judgment on them. But she's saying you're not, and you cannot know what other people have gone through. You cannot know if the offender of the past might now be in recovery. And if we have to speak of somebody, always give positive feedback if we can, just speak silence. Somebody's talking about somebody that made something wrong. You can't say anything positive about them. Remain silent. Do not feed into the slander, the gossip, and all those things that we know attract those that we don't want to be attracting. Let us use this faculty, this tool of silence that we also have at our disposal, to be silent. And in this other book that we also unfortunately don't have in English, Emmanuel is going to tell us that whatever difficulty you find yourself in, refrain from carrying the burden of afflictions and unresolved questions. Penetrate the silence of your own soul. Listen to the thoughts that come from your own being, and you will recognize that the fundamental solution to all of life's problems will come from yourself. He's saying penetrate the silence of your own soul, because there we will find these solutions and the answers to questions that we often have that are just lying within us, but we just don't take the time and they put the intention behind our actions to really stay silent, meditate, and pray with our thoughts, or just observe the world around us with mindfulness and open stance. Because as we even saw in the Spirit's book, it's when we're silent and when we're elevating our thoughts in silence without using the words, we can hear a lot. We can hear a lot of words coming from the inspiration of the higher spirits. In this other book, Emmanuel is even going to say that in the silence of the Spirit, the thoughts of heaven illuminate the thoughts of earth. And benevolent and wise voices speak to our ears through the inarticulate verb of inspiration. Jesus also highlighted prudence and consideration, pointing out the richness of silence, which is up to us to use in the struggles of life in favor of the success of our own tasks. So again, in the silence of the Spirit, the thoughts of heaven illuminate the thoughts of earth, the incarnate ones. And these voices of inspiration can speak to us. In silence, when we're able to really employ silence to our advantage, we can hear those spiritual benefactors helping us. But why is it so hard to be silent? If we're talking about the benefits, why is it so hard? The answer is multifaceted, obviously, and each person may come up with a different one, but just a few reasons is because we're all still evolving. We're still shaping our minds and our emotions. We need to exercise patience too, because as Joanna said in her message number 49 of Happy Life, she says, many people relish in spreading bad news. Be very discreet with them. They will test your resolve with gossip. In such circumstances, silence is the cotton that dampens the noise of the spread of growing evil. So silence is the cotton. How beautiful is this cotton? This thing that we think that's very soft, like lightweight, like very pure white and all of that, that dampens the noise of growing evil. So even with cotton, we can dampen. And she's saying that we should use the silence because we often fall prey to the lesser sentiments and we're still evolving, obviously. But we need to exercise silence so we can be in contact with ourselves, so we can stop the train, the train of gossip to continue on its tracks, so we can hear the benefactors that want to speak to us. And just to close our talk here today, I don't want to paraphrase a beautiful poem, so I want to read not a poem, but a message by the Spirit Mei Mei, psychographed by Chico, just for us to close on silence. And the name of the message is The Melody of Silence. She says, notice the melody of silence in the divine creations. In heaven, everything is our harmony without ostentation of strength. The sun shining without noise, the worlds in movement without disorder, the constellations shining without dazzling us. And on earth, everything signals the music of silence, exalting God's infinite love. The seed germinating without fuss, the wounded tree preparing the fruit that feeds you without revolt, the water that hides in the heart of the fountain today to quench your thirst tomorrow. What articulated words would define their greatness? That is why the Lord also helps us through circumstances that do not speak, through time, the mute sage. Do not break the melody of silence, where your phrase would sound at odds with the law of love that governs our path. Help without noise wherever you go. Remember that the Celestial Father's unlimited patience with our faults, and let us help without fuss our companion on his earthly pilgrimage, who many times only awaits the help of our silence in order to rise to communion with God. And with that, I wish everyone a very blessed week, whatever and whenever you're listening to this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yuri. It has been such a good, enlightening discussion on silence and the impact of our words. But before we go, Yuri, I would ask if you can to do a small prayer. And just before again we go, I want to say thank you, everyone who's been here with us, and see you next time. Yuri?
Absolutely. So I invite everybody to close their eyes, to sit in a comfortable position if you want. And in silence, let us elevate our thoughts to our Creator. Let us elevate our feelings to our Master Jesus, thanking Him for everything that He taught us, for everything that He lived just so we can truly live. Let us thank the higher spirits, all the benefactors that are always so ready to help us and always do such. Let us hope that these words and these teachings, they can apply to ourselves, they can penetrate and find a home in our hearts. We can externalize them through our actions, so we're better using our words and we're better using the silence, communicating with the spirits that are always there to help us. And so be it.
So be it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Yuri. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.